We are now well into our first internal assessment of the year, the 1.1, the carry out an investigation using sources. This little presentation gives you some good advice about how to select your sources and how you need to annotate them. In the next few slides we have a range of different examples showing you different sources, whether they are primary or secondary, as well as some annotations. This first example is taken from a study which has nothing to do with the gold rushes, but the processes involved are just exactly the same. Imagine that this student, instead of working on the gold rushes, had done a study about a riot which took place in London in 1979. At the top here you can see that the focus question that they have picked is, what were the consequences of the Southall riot in London in 1979? On the right hand side we can see the source which they've selected. This particular source is a secondary source. It comes from a book which was written in 2006. The book was called Civil Insurrection from Peterloo to the Present Day. You notice also that the source itself is quite a small one. All that this student has done is to take a particular extract from the book, which amounts to about 5 or 6 lines. However, the reason why it's such a good source is because it links directly to the focus in question. This particular source is about some of the injuries that police officers took on the day of this particular riot. So it's perfect for this particular focus question. Let's just have a quick look at some of the annotations or the notes which go with the source. Remember, when it comes to your internal assessment, these parts of your project are the most important. The colour-coded piece here in red simply says where the source has come from, and it identifies the fact that it's a book about the riots, and it also states very clearly that it's a secondary source. The green annotation is very important because it shows how the student has linked the source to their focus in question. It states very clearly how the source helps to answer the focus in question. The last two annotations, the one in purple and the one in orangey red, are to do with the usefulness and also the reliability of the source. When it comes to your projects on the gold rush, you're going to have to do roughly the same thing. So let's have a look at a couple of examples which are linked in with our topic of study. This next example links very clearly with the work that you're doing, because the focus in question here is what effect did the gold rush have on the people of New Zealand. You can see this time that the student has chosen a photograph and he's clearly identified where that photograph has come from. Remember, even though it is a primary source, it doesn't matter that this student has found this particular piece of source evidence from the internet. It still makes it a primary source, however. So when you are looking for sources on the internet, don't just think that they're all secondary simply because they are being produced by a website. If we take a look now briefly at the annotations on the left-hand side, you can see that the formula that the student has followed this time is exactly the same as for the first slide. The first annotation says what the source shows, where it comes from, and whether it's a primary or secondary source. The next annotation is always going to be about how the source links to the focus in question. The third annotation is going to be a brief sentence or two about how useful that photo is, and the final piece of annotation is going to make a comment about how reliable this particular piece of source evidence can be. So after a while you will find yourself writing pretty much the same kinds of things about all of the different sources, primary and secondary, which you have chosen, and the sources which you've selected either from the internet or also from other resources like books, for example. This last slide here is again related to the question, what effect did the gold rush have on the people of New Zealand? You can see this time that the student has selected a piece of source material again from the internet, but again it's about an effect which the gold rush had on particular people. In this particular instance, it's to do with the impact that the gold rush had on many women throughout New Zealand. This particular source is a secondary source because it was written by someone who wanted to make some kind of historical record about the impact of women, and this particular source has been found on our old friend Wikipedia. Remember, the internet is your friend here, but also Ultranet's an even better friend. There are a number of different resources in the Ultranet folders which are accessible to you. Make sure you check out a PowerPoint called Exemplar Layouts for the Internal, and also check out the exercise here called Annotation Signpost Exercise. Hopefully now you'll have a much clearer idea about what type of sources you need to put into your final piece of assessment work. You'll also have a clearer idea on what you need to do to annotate them effectively so that you can be successful on this first internal assessment of the year.